verse 506. When it is said that there are no such things imagined as the ignorant imagine, it means that there is something which is not recognized by the intellect. The term ignorance is often used in Buddhism. It's a rather sensitive term, I think, in English, but we can be quite clear about its meaning. Ignorance in this context is associated with the intellect. Any intellectual understanding is ignorance. So we're not being anti-intellectual here, because the intellect is fine within its own sphere of operation. But as spiritual practitioners, we're wanting to move to another mode, another dimension, one that is not dominated by the intellect. If our spirituality is dominated by intellectual understanding, then we're missing the point. It's rather like thinking that music is something that is written down on paper. Music, when it's written down on paper, can be analysed ad infinitum. We can look at the structure, the instrumentation, the notes used, the scales, the harmonic progressions, and so on. But all of that is quite different to the experience of music. So that's kind of obvious with regards to music. So why do we have to keep making this point with regard to spiritual understanding? Because spiritual understanding is usually conveyed through the use of words. And the way it's presented in translation is in the form of prose. Even though what we've got here is a verse summary, you don't really get a sense of the verse structure in the English translation. But that gives us a clue as to how we should be approaching these words as something poetic, In fact, I would suggest that all religious texts be regarded as poetry. Poetry, like music, has its own truth, its own validity. We do not need to back it up with intellectual understanding. It can be quite useful to do that to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. Once that becomes dominant, then the spirit of the religion, the spirit of the music, the spirit of the poetry gets forgotten. So this is what this verse is reminding us about. When it is said that there are no such things imagined as the ignorant imagine, it means that there is something which is not recognized by the intellect. So the ignorant are looking for the truth within the realm of intellectual understanding. But we need to step outside of that. As spiritual practitioners, we step outside of that. And what do we step outside of it to? Well, this is what we've been exploring in these videos. I sometimes describe it rather tentatively as our sense of being. We come back to simple being. We collect ourselves, we center ourselves back here. It's a big thing. It's simple awareness, witnessing something beyond me me as a personality, as an ego, and something beyond the world. That something is what is aware of both. It's awareness with a capital A. It's always in operation. We always have the opportunity to come back to it. And this is reinforced by the next verse, verse 507. If it is said that something exists with the wise, this is not what is discriminated by the ignorant. If the wise and the ignorant walk the same way, that which is real with the wise must be a falsehood. So here the wise is identified with the alternative to the intellect. The intellect is what discriminates. There's stuff going on. The intellect identifies that stuff, sees patterns within that stuff, and that becomes the reality for the ignorant. And I should say, this is the state of even the spiritual practitioner much of the time. One of ignorance, one of identifying with the intellect. But when practicing, we then enter into wisdom. We then go to that point beyond the mind, that point of awareness. And we must be quite clear. When you're practicing, you are no longer caught up in the discriminations of the mind. And verse 507 reinforces this point, but I'll continue with that in the next video.